I'm sort of driven by a mix of love and hate. I dislike the things that make you insular and keep you away from like really being able to add value. And I'm really driven by the opportunity to excel and to really deliver more and kind of help people see answers in ways that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. As kind of subject matter experts, we're in this really lucky position where we get to share insights and things.
Before we start, I want to highlight the biggest challenge I've noticed in the Treasury industry. It's professionals finding it tough to build an impactful brand. That's exactly why I put together an ebook, Building and Managing an Impactful Professional Brand. It has helped over 100 professionals define their unique values and stand out in their careers. In this ebook, you'll find practical tips to build a strong network and sharpen the skills you need to succeed in this industry. And the best part? It's completely free. Grab your copy now by clicking the link in the description below. Hello, everyone. This is Ernie Humphrey. I'm your host for the Treasury Truth or Dare podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me James Kelly. He's the co-founder of Your Treasury. So before we dive in to the podcast, James, why don't you give us a little bit about what your background and some of the exciting things that you're doing at Your Treasury?
So I started in Treasury about 20 years ago, worked for a variety of companies. I worked for retail companies, media companies. I worked in infrastructure for a little bit, and I was fairly lucky. I made sort of fairly rapid progress up the ladder. So I've sort of been group treasurer for about 15 years, been through a few big transformations, helped companies move from kind of decentralized treasury functions to more centralized, much more technologically focused departments. I also really love fundraising. So basically going out and raising money, talking to people, that's the fun stuff. The boring stuff is filling in paperwork. So I decided that I would set up a business to basically try and banish paperwork from Treasury and allow people more time to focus on the fun stuff. And I figured that since I particularly valued whenever we got rid of the boring stuff and it gave me time to do the interesting stuff, that hopefully other people would as well. So I've got two playmates in my new world. So Dominic Lynch and Jessica Campbell. Jess is a former astrophysicist turned treasurer.
Wow.
So yeah, we figured if she could understand astrophysics, then she'd be fine with Treasury. And so the three of us basically get to work out how we can solve problems and kind of get rid of the bits of the job that people don't enjoy, and then max out on the stuff that people really do enjoy. And I figured if we got that right, then we'd have more smiles than tears. And so far, that seems to be the way that things are going. So yeah, it's an exciting time because with kind of technology being where it is, it's much easier to kind of make a big difference.
Yeah. They're awesome. Love it. And that's what I always say.
Cool.
The first tenet of technology for me is creating efficiency so I have more time to deliver strategic value, and then I can leverage tools like generative AI to help me do that. But first of all, I need to get my time back and give my folks their time back, because we can redefine our value proposition as a profession. So I think that's incredibly exciting, and we should really embrace that.
Well, particularly because most teams are quite small. And so actually, your start point isn't that people are working 9 to 5 and having a fairly relaxed lifestyle. Most people are, working quite long hours in order to deliver what they're delivering, but not feeling that satisfied that they're actually delivering the things that they would like to be doing. And if they spoke to the CFO, the things that the CFO thinks they should be doing. But there's a lot of kind of important and urgent, but not necessarily very inspiring stuff that you have to do in Treasury as well. So you've got to balance that a bit.
All right, let's go ahead and hop into our Treasury Truth or Dare framework. For those of you who haven't yet experienced the podcast, what we do is we have several rounds of Truth or Dare. Well, I'll ask my guest, in this case, of course, James, whether he'd like to do a Truth or a Dare, and then we will give him a Truth or a Dare, and then after 4 or 5 rounds, we will let him turn the table on me and let him see if he can get me to do a dare, which I have yet to attempt, which is a feat because I've had some of my friends on here and they have gotten me pretty good. So that's a high bar. All right, James, what are you going to start out with today? Would you like to start out with a truth or a dare?
I'll start with the truth.
All right. There you go. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to dive in a little bit here. Specific areas. What parts of Treasury are you really more passionate about? And maybe also what parts of Treasury, focusing a little bit on when we have technology, where can we focus more and deliver more value?
I'm quite a people person, and I think one of the reasons I got into Treasury was like meeting banks, going out and meeting different people, hearing people's stories, understanding the way that they're thinking about the world, and kind of how we can, you know, make more, whether that's more money, more output, improve growth within companies. That's kind of what I really care about. And so that, plays in a lot to kind of treasury strategy, also plays a lot into communication and things. And so the things that I'm sort of driven by a mix of love and hate. I dislike the things that make you insular and keep you away from like really being able to add value. And I'm really driven by the opportunity to excel and to really deliver more and kind of help people see answers in ways that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. As kind of subject matter experts, we're in this really lucky position where we get to share insights and things where we're known to be expert in our area, and therefore we have the opportunity to kind of add a bit more value to really reframe things and help people to understand problems in new and complex ways. And so being able to find ways of making the complex simple and get rid of the stuff that gets in the way is kind of a big driver of mine.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's amazing. Like your my commercial for why the treasury profession is fun, and the fact that you got into treasury because you like to communicate and collaborate. I think the perception I know in the U.S. is the opposite, that we're introverted. We did this to not be out there and communicating. And I always like to say, collaborate, impact. Right. So that's really seems to speak to what you're all about. So
So
I gotta
it's
clap on
interesting
that one.
because I did a role as finance director of one of our divisions because there was a period
Yeah.
where I thought I might like to become CFO, and you have to have FP&A experience, which I had.
Yeah.
You have to have the kind of commercial finance experience. And one of the things that I found really difficult in a way was that I didn't have any levers. Like in treasury, you've got the interest charge, you've got bank
Right.
charges, you've got, the way that you're organized. That there are all sorts of things that you can do at any point in time. If something gets difficult, there's generally a way that you can overcome it. When you're in commercial finance, you have to lean on other people and you have to go, okay, right,
Okay.
salespeople, I know your targets were mad, but we're missing them at the moment. So what can we do? Like marketing, what can we do to improve things here? And there's a lot of kind of influencing, which is great, but ultimately, you're held to account for something that you're not directly able to control. So I really love that in treasury there's so much that we are able to control.
Right.
There's no other role in finance where you get responsibility for an entire primary statement. The treasury department is basically the cash flow statement. Like balance sheet is split between 4 or 5 different teams. P&L is between about 25 different teams. But cash flow, there's only one place to go. So you've got a lot of responsibility, but a lot of opportunity as well, which is cool.
Yeah, I always tell people I've done some research here, most focus on US companies where I told them, like, what is the influence and control treasury that you have over AP and AR and technology? And it's not what I want to see. And I'm like, we should endeavor to at least influence everything. And like you said, once we learn how to do that in treasury, then if we step up to the next level, we have that experience and we can become the CFO and we can, we can influence. And all right, go to our next round here. We're gonna go for another truth, or we're gonna go for a dare.
I think we'll go one more truth and then
Okay.
we'll get brave.
All right. I'm pretty confident that you're pretty brave already. All right. So this is another thing near and dear to my heart. How do we promote treasury for younger professionals and get them engaged in this great profession we are in?
So I think this comes down to two things. I think one is that we have to be brave ourselves and view that there is an entry route for people direct into the profession. The number of treasurers I talk to who are like, well, I need to recruit a junior, but I've got to recruit someone who's got a couple of years experience because that first year or two is just such a big jump. And so creating the pipeline and the opportunity to get in without it being too complicated, I think is really important, because that's, if the teams themselves don't believe that students and young people can come in, the chances of them believing it are very low. So I think that's a kind of start point. I think the next piece is about being really clear about what we are. A lot of the time, Treasury is kind of defined almost as, well, it's not commercial finance or it's not FP&A. And it's kind of, well, it's a bit associated, it's not banking, but it's a bit like banking. And I think we need to be more front-footed to say Treasury is about financial risk management in organizations, and it's about making sure that companies are efficient and can borrow money to grow at sensible rates. I think if you look at something like M&A, that's something that it's really easy for people to give that elevator pitch.
Right.
There isn't such a well-defined elevator pitch in Treasury, and I think that's super important. Because ultimately, so there's a BBC comedy where they had this thing called the granny test. And the granny would be like, "So what is it that you do, dear?" And, they'd sort of say, "Well, I work in public relations." And they're like, "Oh, so you're in advertising?" "Well, not really advertising. No, we send information to journalists to promote our products." "Oh, so why didn't you think of being a journalist?" And so it's one of those things that lots of these professions get picked apart because they're kind of like, well, it's not really very value added, is it? If you thought about running a little shop, then you'd be really helping people. And I think, Treasury, it isn't an area that is super important. If you look at, I mean, the best example I've got actually was 2008. I worked for a UK retailer or international based retailer,
Right.
but with a big UK footprint. And the chief exec stood up and it was just after the interim results, and the share price at that point was £1.12, which meant a kind of market cap of about $5 billion, something like that. And that was well down on where it had been. And effectively they stood up and said, well, look, we're in a situation where the analysts and shareholders are saying, we can't work out whether you've got so much debt that you're going to have to declare bankruptcy and restructure, or whether you're going to be okay. If it's bankruptcy, then your stock's worth nothing. If you're going to be okay, then your share price would really be about £2.20. So at about £1, we're hedging our bets. There's a 50-50 chance either way. And I remember thinking, God, like if we could just get rid of that insolvency risk, you can double the share price overnight. It really brought home that concept of, never raise money when you need to, because, I've seen this through my whole career. It's super binary. No one worries about Treasury until the second it becomes a problem, and then everyone suddenly panics because they've
Yeah.
never had to think about it before.
Yeah.
And so the key is to try and draw back the curtain enough that people can understand that there are complex things that you're managing, but that they're going to be okay. And so if something does go wrong, that they still have confidence that they're going to be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that I talk about this on the Treasury brand. So that's what I'm working on. We got to have those things, the elevator pitch, right? What we aren't, this is what we are. And you own that in your story about 2008. I can resonate with that. So when I was a treasury manager back then, I was responsible for when the banks wanted to come calling us. And so every time they wanted to take me to lunch, I went all the time. My boss be like, "Why are you going to lunch?" And then all of a sudden, the financial crisis hits, and then someone calls me and says, "Thank you for going to all those lunches with all the bankers, because now they're, now they pick up the phone when I call them." So in our world and like life, you never know when the shoe's on the other foot. So yeah, so let's be cognizant of that. All right, seems like you are ready for a dare. So I'm going to ask you to share with us, what film is your guilty pleasure?
I really like Frankie and Johnny, which is
Ah,
Al Pacino and Michelle Pfeiffer,
yeah.
um, Claire de Lune, like running through it, etc. It's a mix of just about up enough to be something that you can confess to enjoying watching, but it is like super slashy and just generally a really nice film. So it's a bit of a comfort blanket.
All right, love it. All right, thanks for sharing. Okay, let's go another round here, and then one more round, then I'll let you hit me up with a day. Are you gonna go for a truth, or are you gonna go back-to-back dares, which is almost unheard of. So,
Well, in that case, that sounds like I should definitely go back-to-back dares.
okay, well, since you're going back-to-back dares, I'm gonna make it hard on you. I shouldn't do that because you're gonna get to give me a dare, but hey, I like to raise the stakes at all times. Poker guy. All right, hope you're game for this. Most people are. I want you to sing a few bars of your go-to karaoke song.
Okay. I'm gonna have a go at Get Here. So, you can reach me by a sailboat, climb a tree and swing rope to rope, take a sled and slide down a slope into these arms of mine.
That way, hey, you're the karaoke king. So I got some other folks. So sometime we're all gonna be in the same place, and we're all gonna go hit the karaoke bar. So thank you. That was awesome. Okay, so now I'm gonna turn the tables, James. I'm gonna let you ask me to do a dare.
Okay, so we're gonna give you a few seconds to see if you can
Okay.
find 3 objects, and I'd like to see you have a go at juggling with whatever 3 objects you can find.
Oh my. All right. Well, this is me at Intercom. So number one, I know people have these. This is my treasury management genius at work. And then, I mean, I got to make sure this is empty. Got my Diet Coke can. And
That could be
as I like to
unfortunate.
make it interesting, I have a pair of scissors.
Oh wow.
So
So
I
so
can't juggle it all. So, all
that's
right.
not bad though, considering.
There you go. So
That's all
I
right.
do, I do have scissors because I was just doing my background for my podcast. So hey, this place is exciting. The host juggles with scissors, so I got that going for me. Probably
Risk
never been
management in
seen.
action. That's the thing.
That's right. See, this is what I want everyone to have on their desk. I love treasury management. I got some swag going, so I like
Excellent.
that. Okay,
Excellent.
all right.
Eleanor's I
Let's
love
get
treasury
down to
mugs.
business here. All right, next round. Don't do a triple dare because I don't think anyone will be able to handle that. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you a truth. Okay, and so this is another reason why I like the podcast is I give the younger folks some advice, and doesn't matter where you're at. Can you just share with us how important networking has been for you, not only within Treasury, beyond Treasury, and how it's benefited your career?
So it's super important. And it's one of these things that I think, as you were saying earlier on, like you never know who's going to be in the same situation, who's going to be working
Yeah.
with you, who you're going to be working for. Treasury tends to be it's quite a small network as well. And
Yes.
therefore kind of everyone knows everyone. And I guess, the type of thing that I do in LinkedIn in a way I've been doing for quite a long time, because I remember one of the things that I really wanted to improve about 10 years ago was my public speaking and kind of feeling comfortable talking to senior management. And I thought, well, I can't like keep going and arranging meetings with the CFO so that I can get comfortable speaking to them. So I need to find a place where I can experiment and get better at storytelling and really perfect that skill. And so I started using conferences and things like that as opportunities to meet, test, and you see feedback from people. You see how people are responding, whether they're leaning in,
Right.
leaning back, how they're reacting, which from that you're able to go, okay, this is something that people are interested in. This is a way of explaining things that people understand. And I find that, so I had a colleague, guy called Frank DePentimer, whose son Michael now works for JP Morgan. And I ran the internship program at Pearson for a couple of years. And he gave the interns such brilliant advice. So it was during COVID. And he said, look, it's going to be really tough for you because you're not going to be able to physically meet anybody. And so you don't have the opportunity to have corridor conversations or that kind of thing. But what he did was before each meeting, he would go off and he'd do LinkedIn research and he'd
Uh,
kind of look them up on the internet, etc., see anything that he could find so that he could say, okay, right, I know that like such and such is really interested in rugby. So let's have a
yeah.
quick conversation about rugby and, who's your favorite player and that kind of thing. And so he'd try and make sure that he was always in meetings 5 minutes early so that the second anybody came, he was ready to kind of have the conversation while they waited for everyone to gather. And then typically he would send an email at the end of each meeting to say, Ernie, it's really great to meet you. I loved our conversation. really great to see how you juggled those scissors. And next time I need to make some cuts, I'll be getting in touch with you. And I'd love to put a coffee in sometime. Do you have 20 minutes sometime? And he said that 2 times in 3, people would come back and be like, yeah, put something in next week or the following week. People like to help, people like to connect, people like to network. And actually, that makes such a big difference. When I run workshops where we've got whole teams, one of the things that's really interesting and kind of exciting actually is where you pull together different members of the team who are all working on, let's say they're working on FX management. You might have someone from the back office who's doing a reconciliation that the person in the front office doesn't know about because they've never had any real need to do that. And then you talk about the process and the person on the front office is like, oh, I've got this problem. And the back office person is like, oh, well, I do exactly the same thing. What are we both creating like Excel spreadsheets or whatever? And they're like, oh, maybe we should join forces. Maybe we should, and it's really kind of quite exciting to see those interactions and see those like little spark points.
Right.
And you have, that happens within Treasury, that happens with other parts of finance as well. Tax teams who are like, well, I've got, we're trying to get money out of China and we don't know how to do it. And it turns out that there's someone in tax who's looking at exactly the same question, but from a slightly different angle. And so the more that you get, when I was early career, kind of when I was about 26, 27, and I worked for the retailer, every Friday night we would go to the pub and 2 hours we'd be in the pub and I would learn so much, particularly about what was really going on. Because when you're in the office, everyone feels a bit awkward. And I took that when I moved to Rentokil, I had one team member who I knew that there was absolutely no point in doing a one-to-one with her because she would tell me that everything was always fine.
Right.
And so it became a running joke where I was like, Natalie, are we going to go for a walk and go to the pub, or are we going to start out and we'll have an open conversation and then we'll have some drinks? But it's one of those things I knew that like once she'd relaxed a little bit, then I'd hear, oh, such and she was very French. And so, she'd be like, oh, such and such is really annoying. Or they don't know what they're doing. So, and then you'd be like, okay, now I understand what's going on. So yeah.
I love it. I love all of that, especially the networking piece and facilitating, right, that with your team and teaching them soft skills. And for me, I tell people you want a different audience, right? Like you said, I was used to senior management, so I I was used to speaking at conferences, and I had opportunities a little bit, not as much as you, to talk to senior folks. I'm like, okay, how can I challenge myself? So the first thing I did, one thing I did is I tried to do stand up, and I've still done that a few times. Totally different environment. And I've also done improv, which is also incredibly cool. So I try and get treasury leaders. I'm like, take your people to improv or something, and you will be amazed how much easier it is to watch them talk to people, because it just turns on some of the brain synapses, just can fire totally differently once you get it.
I'm going to have to pick your brains at some point. So we did a workshop a couple of weeks ago and it was 8 people who didn't know each other. And they were in a room that was kind of badly set up because everyone was quite spaced apart. And so it was like being the sort of librarian in a library. You're sort of standing at the front and everyone's a little bit scared. And once I got them doing a group exercise, it was fine. But it was one of those things that it took me about 15 minutes to get to that point. And I came out of it going, do you know what? I should just have, although I got everyone to introduce themselves, it was very much I'm feeling a little bit inhibited, a little bit concerned here. And once they got working together, so we find that the bits of our workshops that people love and remember are actually the working together on a task, whether it's come up with a logo for a bank or whatever it happens to be.
I forgot to mention your networking piece. I've had my own advice in my posts and all that good stuff about finding something on a personal level you can connect with someone, and you will immediately see their lights brighten up. You'll immediately see that connection form. Like you said, you run, my son runs, he does cross country. We like to bike, we like to whatever, we like to sing. And then once that happens, even if you have someone maybe at work that was all remote and you didn't get along with, and you're both thinking, "Ah," and then you're like, hey, you like this, you like a team, you like football team, and then you immediately that goes away. I mean, it's amazing how
Yeah.
that can change on the snap. So I always give that advice.
So I had a thing with a former colleague who I'd always got on reasonably well with, and then
Good.
he was US based. He said something, and I was like, "How? I can't believe he said that!"
Yeah.
Like, and so I kind of went back and was like, "I'm trying my best here. What's going on?"
Right.
And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Well, that's really like pretty tough on me what
Yeah.
you've just said." And he's like, "Not in American, it's not."
Oh,
So then we had this whole conversation. It was quite funny because we both had a bit of a joke about it. It was like, "Oh, it turns out that's fine in American." It's like,
yeah.
this is what that means in Britain.
That's another whole conversation about the cultural differences. Yeah, I find that as well. I hear that too often about us. We'll talk about this later, but I was talking to other folks but Leanne and a little bit Eleanor remotely about how do we get people from the US and outside the US to get along in Treasury because US people are the data's hard to deal with, and I get it and I know it. So that's another podcast. All right, let's do one more round, truth or
Cool.
dare, and then I'll let you leave us with a few closing thoughts.
Let's go one more dare.
All right, here we go. All right. What's one of the biggest mistakes you made professionally, and what did you learn from it?
So I've had a couple where I think probably the biggest one I've made was I did an interest rate swap in two tranches. I did one with one bank and one with another bank.
Yeah.
And the second tranche I did with a bank who I wouldn't normally trade with, but we didn't have quite so much business with them. And as I went through doing the trade, I was feeling I'm not completely convinced that the person on the other side understands exactly what I'm doing. But it's like, it's okay. It's a replica of what I'm doing with the first bank. And we got it all planned out. And then it turned out, so it was a very big trade. It was like $1.5 billion notional. And basically what happened with the second bank was they got the day count wrong on one. I was doing back-to-back swaps. And on one swap, they didn't align the day count. So one was based on a 365 day
Right.
rate and one was based on a 360. Now, the rate that they quoted on the 360 day happened to be very, very similar to the rate on the 365 that I'd done with the other bank. So I signed off on it, not realizing that they'd made a mistake on the day count, which of course I should have spotted. And so the difference in mark to market and at inception was about $800,000. And so it was one of those things that I had a very awkward couple of days where we went back through the tapes. I was able to show that, this was what I'd asked. But effectively, the bank had laid off the risk. They'd done the trade. And therefore, everyone was in a bad situation because I was there going, well, I wouldn't have done the trade on these terms, but now we've done it. So we ended up kind of, having to find a bit of a middle ground and work out a way through. That was pretty awkward. But it was one of those things that it told me kind of a couple of things. One was around the importance of really trusting yourself and kind of following that. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Because I kind of, as I went through it, I was thinking, I'm just not completely convinced that this is right. But I also learned an awful lot about how you deal with other team members and senior management when things go wrong. And I think that actually the way that I was able to get through it quite quickly and establish what had happened, explain the situation, etc., and demonstrate that actually, although we weren't going to quite hit the return that we wanted on the trade, we were still going to be very, very close. And therefore, overall, we'd have probably still done it. It just wasn't quite as good a trade as we wanted. It also meant I had some very tough conversations with the bank, but through that, you form really strong relationships because if you're seen to be behaving in a way that is respectful and thoughtful, then you have a common problem and you work through it together. Whereas if you're all shouty and, I can't believe that you did this and da da da, it's just a way of making enemies. And so yeah.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people. Clients I've worked with, I'm not perfect, and on the other side, they're not perfect, and I'm like, I want to see how you react. It's easy to be all nice and lovey-dovey when everything's perfect and everyone's done everything exactly as they wanted. What shows is what happens when there's a mistake. One, do I
Yeah.
own it? What do I do with it? How do I address it? How do you take that? And then when the shoe's on the other foot, as it will be, what are you gonna do? And then, like one of my banks I used to is no longer in existence, so I'm okay. Wachovia, I used to go at it with them, but they owned their mistake, they admitted it, we made it. But as soon as someone says to me, first of all, I'm sorry, that is one good thing. Then two is, all right, let's move forward. And then how you react, just that initial, and people that don't point fingers, and that's another whole conversation. Keep your fingers to yourself, and anyone that my team that points a finger, I'm going to chop your fingers off. Don't be pointing your fingers unless it's right here. So,
Yeah.
all right, final closing thoughts, James Kelly, folks to inspire the next generation of Treasury professionals.
So I think this is a really exciting time to be joining Treasury, because we're in a situation where Treasury matters again. Rates are higher. You've got a situation where there's volatility, therefore there's focus. Where there's focus, there's opportunity. Combine that with a situation where technology is now starting to make solving the problems that, quite frankly, have been embarrassing for the last 10 years solvable. And we're in a situation where we can really shape the future of the profession to be really value added and really be on the front foot. And I think it's one of those things that I kind of look forward to, a place where, treasurers can be keynote speakers at general finance conferences, and people are going, do you know what? These people, they're really pushing it. And I think, there are some great examples. I think that Microsoft, some of the Treasury teams have done really inspiring work. But I think it's one of those things that I think there's that next level along that we need the everyday companies to kind of really reach the same kind of levels.
Absolutely.
And then I think that's going to be really exciting.
All right. Thank you very much, James Kelly, for being a guest on our podcast. To all our viewers, have the courage to live your Treasury truths and dare to be great in everything that you do within and beyond Treasury. Until next time, everyone. Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys liked it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned and hit the subscribe button for more.